I was her best friend, her confidant, her companion through the darkest nights, until I became the only silent witness to the horror that happened in that pink bedroom. My name is Lila, and for 7 long years, I was the doll of a little girl who had her childhood brutally stolen. I watched her eyes lose the sparkle of innocence. I watched her tears soak my dress night after night. I watched secrets being whispered in my ear, secrets no child should ever carry. This is the most devastating story I have ever witnessed. A story of trauma, silence, courage, and finally survival. Prepare your hearts, because what you're about to hear will touch your souls forever. It was March 15th, 2010, a date that remains etched in my memory as the day everything began. I remember every detail of that sunny morning when I first came out of the cardboard box and found myself looking into the most beautiful eyes that ever existed. Big, brown, full of life and expectation. "Mom, she's perfect!" The little girl shouted, her delicate little hands picking me up so carefully as if I were made of crystal. "Look at her hair. It's just like mine. And her eyes, they're the color of the lilac flowers in Grandma's garden." That's how my name was born, Lila. Not just because my eyes were lilac-colored, but because she said I reminded her of her grandmother's garden, a place where she felt safe and loved. In that moment, I knew I had a mission, to be everything that garden represented to her. Sophie had just turned 6 years old. She was a typical child her age, curious, playful, with that contagious laugh that made any adult smile. She had curly brown hair that her mother always tied with a pink bow, and she wore twirly dresses that she loved to spin around in. "Lila will be my best friend forever," she declared on that first day, pressing me against her little chest. "We'll share all our secrets, all our adventures, and you'll sleep with me every night, okay?" If I could have spoken in that moment, I would have said yes, that I would be her companion for life, but dolls don't speak. We only love, observe, and keep watch. The first months were magical. Sophie took me everywhere, to the garden where we played tea party with her other dolls, to the kitchen where she helped me make imaginary cookies, to the living room where we watched cartoons together. I was an integral part of her routine, her life, her dreams. Every night, after her mother tucked her in, Sophie would whisper her small childhood worries to me. "Lila, do you think the teacher liked my drawing? Do you think Pipoca, her hamster, knows I love him? Tomorrow I'm going to try to be friends with the new girl at school." They were innocent concerns, typical of a 6-year-old girl. Her biggest drama was when it rained and she couldn't play in the garden, or when Mom said she couldn't have another sweet before dinner. The house where we lived was cozy. Sophie's room was on the 2nd floor, with pink walls decorated with butterflies, a white canopy bed, and a large window overlooking the garden. From my place on the shelf next to the bed, I could see the entire room, the dresser full of colorful little clothes, the study table with her drawing materials, and the other dolls that shared the space with me. Sophie's father traveled a lot for work. He was a tall man, always well-dressed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her mother worked part-time as a nurse and was always running between household chores and taking care of her daughter. It was a family that, from the outside, seemed absolutely normal. But I was beginning to notice things. It was in September of that same year that I noticed the first change. Sophie came back from school quieter than usual. During snack time, she only nibbled at the sandwich her mother had prepared with such care. "My dear, did something happen at school?" her mother asked, stroking her daughter's hair. "No, Mom. I'm just a little tired," Sophie replied, but her eyes couldn't lie. There was something different in them, a shadow I had never seen before. That night she picked me up and hugged me tighter than usual. "Lila," she whispered in my ear, "do you promise you'll always love me no matter what happens?" It was a strange question for a 6-year-old to ask, Children that age usually have absolute certainty about the unconditional love surrounding them. Why would Sophie be questioning this? In the following days, I began to notice other subtle changes. She stopped asking to invite little friends over to play at home. She stopped running excitedly to greet her father when he came back from trips. She started having nightmares. "Lila, will you stay with me? You won't go away while I sleep, will you?" She asked me every night, placing me right beside her in bed, sometimes even under the covers. One night I woke up, yes, we dolls have our form of consciousness, to Sophie crying softly. They were silent tears, the kind of crying from someone who doesn't want to be discovered. She pressed me against her chest and whispered words that still cut my heart today. Why did he say it's normal? Why did he say it's our special secret? I don't like this secret, Lila, but he said that if I tell, you'll go away and Mommy won't love me anymore, and I'll be sent far away. My world collapsed in that instant. Even being a doll, I understood exactly what was happening. The horror, the betrayal, the manipulation. Everything became clear as crystal. And the worst part, I couldn't do anything except be there, being her silent support. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of my existence. Sophie began to change in ways that broke my cotton heart. The cheerful and spontaneous girl was transforming into someone cautious, always alert, always afraid. She stopped wearing the twirly dresses she loved so much. "I don't want to anymore, Mom. I prefer long pants," she said one day, and I saw the confusion on her mother's face. How could a woman imagine that her 6-year-old daughter was trying to protect herself in the only way she knew how? The nights became my greatest nightmare. I would lie there, motionless, being forced to witness what no child should go through. Sophie held me so tight that sometimes I was sure my arms would come off, but I understood. I was her anchor, her only connection to something safe and pure in the midst of that storm. "Lila," she whispered. Afterward, her tears making dark stains on my dress, he said all girls go through this. Said this is how daddies show they love their daughters. But why does it hurt so much? Why do I feel so dirty? How I wished I could speak. How I wished I could scream to the whole world what was happening. But all I could do was absorb her tears, keep her secrets, and try to transmit through my cloth embrace all the love and protection she needed. During the day, Sophie became a consummate actress. She smiled at her mother, answered her teacher's questions, played with classmates at school, but I saw through the mask. I saw how her hands trembled when she heard footsteps in the hallway. I saw how she shrank when any man approached. I saw how she stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping well, stopped being a child. "Do you think it's my fault, Lila?" she asked me one night after another terrible episode. He said I'm special, that I provoked this, said girls like me are born for this. Do you think he's right? My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. A 6-year-old child blaming herself for the evil an adult was doing to her. An innocent child believing the cruel manipulations of a predator. If I could have cried, I would have filled oceans with my tears. Sophie's mother began to notice something was wrong, but couldn't identify what. "Sophie seems different," I heard her comment on the phone with Grandma. "Quieter, more, I don't know, older. Maybe it's a phase." If only she knew it wasn't a phase. It was the result of a childhood being systematically destroyed by someone who should protect and love. As the months passed, Sophie developed rituals that broke my heart. Every night, after everyone was asleep, she checked if the door was locked, something a 6-year-old shouldn't even know how to do. She hid a chair under the bed to push against the door when necessary. She positioned me strategically so I could watch the room's entrance. Lila, she whispered on the U. Most difficult nights. If something happens to me, you'll tell someone, okay? You're my witness, you know the truth. It was too heavy a responsibility for any doll to carry. Being the only repository of such dark secrets, being the only one who knew the full extent of the horror Sophie was living through. During the day, she carried me everywhere. I went to school hidden in her backpack, went to dance classes inside her bag, went to visits at Grandma's house in her lap. Sophie could no longer stay away from me. I was her security, her proof that true love still existed in the world. The teacher asked why you're always with me, she told me one day. Said girls my age usually leave their dolls at home. But she doesn't understand, right, Lila? You're not just a doll, you're my real family. This made me realize something terrible. Sophie was isolating herself from real people. She trusted me, a doll, more than the adults who should protect her. This showed how her ability to trust was being destroyed. The physical changes were also visible. Sophie lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, started biting her nails until they bled. Her posture changed. She always walked hunched over, as if trying to hide. Her smiles became rare and forced. "Why don't you play in the garden anymore?" her mother asked one day. "I don't feel like it," Sophie replied, squeezing me tighter. "I prefer to stay in the room with Lila." The room became her refuge, but also her prison. It was the only place where she felt safe, but it was also the scene of her worst nightmares. When Sophie turned 7, the abuse had already become a terrible routine. She had developed a frightening ability to dissociate. During the most difficult moments, she would stare at me fixedly, as if trying to transport herself inside me to a safe place where nothing could hurt her. "Lila," she whispered one night, "sometimes I imagine I'm you, that I'm made of cotton and can't feel anything, that I'm just a doll on a shelf watching other people's lives. It would be easier, wouldn't it?" These words terrified me. Sophie was trying to disconnect from reality as a way to survive, but that also meant she was disconnecting from life itself. It was around this time that she stopped crying. What initially seemed like relief soon proved even more worrying. Sophie had reached a point of emotional numbness that frightened me deeply. "You know, Lila," she said one night, with a voice frighteningly mature, "for her 7 years, today I discovered that other children don't go through what I go through. I saw a movie at school about happy families, and I realized this isn't normal. He lied to me." It was the first time I saw a spark of anger in her eyes, and that gave me a glimmer of hope. Anger meant she was still fighting internally, that she hadn't given up completely. "But what if I tell, and no one believes me?" she continued. "What if they say it's my fault? What if they send me away from home?" The fear of revelation was almost as great as the trauma she was living through. She had been so manipulated that she believed telling the truth would be worse than continuing to suffer in silence. During this period, I began to notice that Sophie's mother was getting more worried. I saw whispered phone conversations, investigative looks during meals, subtle attempts to make Sophie open up. "My love," I heard the mother say one night, "you know you can tell me anything, right? Mommy will always believe you and protect you." But Sophie was already too hurt to trust easily. "I know, Mom," she replied, but her eyes said otherwise. Everything changed one night in January, when Sophie was 8 years old. It was different from the other times, more violent, more cruel. When we were finally alone, Sophie didn't cry. She simply looked at me with a determination I had never seen before. "Enough," she whispered, and her voice had a strength that surprised me. "Enough, Lila. I can't take it anymore. If he hurts me one more time, I'd rather die." These words chilled me to the core. My little Sophie, at 8 years old, was contemplating death as an escape from her suffering. It was inadmissible. It was unacceptable. There had to be a way to help her. That night, something extraordinary happened. Sophie got up from bed, picked me up, and walked to the mirror. For long minutes, she looked at our reflection, a small, fragile girl holding a rag doll. "Lila," she said, "you saw everything, didn't you? You know the whole truth, and you never judged me, never doubted me, never abandoned me." Her tears finally returned, but they were different now. They weren't tears of despair, but of decision. "Tomorrow," she continued, "I'm going to tell Mommy everything, and you'll be with me, as you always have been. If she doesn't believe me, at least you'll know I tried. You'll remember me as someone who was brave in the end, okay?" That night, for the first time in 2 years, Sophie slept a deep, restorative sleep. It was as if the decision to speak had lifted a gigantic weight from her small shoulders. The next day dawned grey, but to me, it seemed the brightest of my existence. Sophie woke up determined, dressed me in my best dress, combed my hair carefully, and whispered, "Today is an important day, Lila. Today everything will change." During breakfast, Sophie could barely eat. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes had an unshakable determination. When her mother asked if she was okay, Sophie simply said, "Mom, after I come back from school, I need to talk to you about something very important. It's about Daddy." I saw the mother's face pale slightly. Maybe she already suspected something. Maybe her maternal instinct had been sounding alarms for months. At school, Sophie held me the whole time. During art class, she drew a family, but the father was separated from the rest, alone in a corner of the paper. The teacher asked about the drawing, and Sophie simply said, "Sometimes families become different from what we thought they were." When we got home that afternoon, Sophie asked to talk with her mother in the living room. She positioned me on the couch next to her, where I could hear everything. "Mom," Sophie began, her voice trembling but firm, "do you remember when you said I could tell you anything?" "Of course, my love, always." Sophie took a deep breath, looked at me as if asking for strength, and then opened her heart. "Daddy, he hurts me. In a way he shouldn't hurt. It's been going on for a long time, and he said it was our secret, but I can't keep it anymore." What followed was devastating. The mother collapsed, Sophie collapsed, and I, if I could have, would have collapsed too. Tears, screams, desperate hugs, promises of protection, pleas for forgiveness for not noticing earlier. "Why didn't you tell me before, my angel?" the mother asked, hugging Sophie as if she wanted to protect her from all the evil in the world. "Because I was scared. Scared you wouldn't believe me. Scared it was my fault. Scared of losing Lila," Sophie replied, pulling me into the hug. It was in this moment that I realized the true impact of my presence in her life. I wasn't just a doll. I was proof that she deserved unconditional love. I was the constant reminder that goodness existed in the world. I was her anchor in the storm. The days following the revelation were a whirlwind. Police, social workers, doctors, psychologists, the house filled with adults asking questions, taking notes, trying to understand the extent of what had happened. Sophie faced it all with courage that made me deeply proud. She told her story repeatedly, always holding me, always using me as a source of strength. "Lila knows it's true," she told one of the investigators. "She saw everything. She was my witness." The father was arrested. I remember the moment when the police took him away in handcuffs. Sophie watched from the bedroom window, pressing me against her chest, and whispered, "It's over, Lila, finally over." But it wasn't over, not really. Trauma doesn't disappear when the perpetrator is removed. Sophie still woke up screaming in the middle of the night, still was afraid of adult men, still blamed herself for what had happened. "Why didn't I tell earlier?" she asked me on difficult nights. How many times could I have avoided it if I had been braver? How I wanted to be able to explain to her that a 6-year-old child has no responsibility for the actions of a predatory adult. How I wanted to be able to say that she had already been too brave for her age. Therapy began. Twice a week, Sophie and I went to Dr. Martinez's office, a psychologist specialized in childhood trauma. At first, Sophie barely spoke in sessions. She just sat there holding me, responding with monosyllables. "Sophie," said Dr. Martinez in one of the first sessions, "tell me about Lila. She seems very important to you." It was the first question that made Sophie open up completely. She told about how I had been her constant companion, her confidant, her silent witness. She told how I had never judged her, never abandoned her, never doubted her. "Lila taught me that real love exists," Sophie said, hugging me tighter. "Love that doesn't hurt, that doesn't ask for anything in return, that just wants you to be happy." Healing is not linear. For months, Sophie had ups and downs. Days when she seemed to be improving, followed by nights when nightmares returned with full force. But I was always there, being her constant, her anchor. Slowly, Sophie began to recover pieces of the childhood that had been stolen from her. She went back to wearing colorful dresses. She went back to playing in the garden. She went back to smiling spontaneously, small smiles at first, but genuine ones. "Lila," she told me on a sunny afternoon while we were playing tea in the garden, "today I laughed for real at school. I can't remember the last time that happened." It was small victories like this that gave me hope. Sophie was finding her way back to the light, and I had the privilege of being beside her on this journey. Her mother was also healing. She blamed herself terribly for not noticing the signs earlier. How does a mother not notice that her daughter is suffering like this? I heard her cry on the phone with Grandma, but gradually, with family therapy and lots of love, she also began to forgive herself. When Sophie turned 10, she was already much stronger. She still had scars, she always would, but she had recovered her essence. She went back to being curious, playful, full of dreams for the future. "You know, Lila," she told me on her birthday, "I want to help other children like me when I grow up. I want to be a psychologist like Dr. Martinez. And do you know why?" She looked me in the eyes and continued, "Because you taught me that sometimes all a child needs is to know that someone believes in them, that someone loves them unconditionally. You were that for me. Now I want to be that for other children." The years passed. Sophie grew up, graduated, became a brilliant psychologist specialized in childhood trauma. She married a gentle man who understood her story and loved her not despite the scars, but including them as part of who she was. I continued being part of her life, but in a different way. I was no longer the desperate anchor of a traumatized child. Now I was a reminder of the love she had always deserved, of the strength she had always had, of the courage that saved her. When Sophie had her first daughter, she placed me in the baby's room. "This is Lila," she told the tiny newborn. "She's going to protect you and love you like she protected and loved Mommy." Today, Sophie works at an NGO that helps children who are victims of abuse. Her office has a shelf full of dolls, teddy bears, and other toys, all donated by families who understood that sometimes a transitional object can make the difference between hope and despair. "Every child I see," Sophie told me in one of our moments together, "receives a special companion, because I learned from you, Lila, that unconditional love can come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes having a silent witness to our suffering is the first step to finding the voice to cry out for help." The teenage years brought new challenges. Sophie was in high school now, and the scars of her childhood trauma manifested in different ways. She struggled with intimacy, had panic attacks when boys her age tried to get close, and often felt like she was living behind an invisible wall that separated her from her peers. "Lila," she confided in me one evening when she was 16, "I watch other girls my age dating, holding hands, having their first kisses, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to do that. What if I'm too broken? What if what happened to me ruined me forever?" These were the moments that broke my cotton heart all over again. Trauma doesn't just steal childhood innocence, it steals the natural progression of growing up, the normal milestones that should bring joy instead of fear. But Sophie was stronger than she knew. With Dr. Martinez's continued help, she slowly learned to separate the past from the present, to recognize that her father's actions were not a reflection of all men, and most importantly, that she was not defined by what had been done to her. Her first boyfriend was a gentle soul, named Marcus, who attended the same support group for trauma survivors. Their relationship was built on understanding, patience, and mutual respect. I watched from my shelf as Sophie learned that physical affection could be healing rather than harmful, that trust could be rebuilt brick by brick. "He knows about you, Lila," Sophie told me one day, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "I told him how you saved me, how you were my anchor when I had nothing else to hold on to. He said he's grateful to you for keeping me safe until real help could arrive." When Sophie graduated high school as valedictorian, she dedicated her speech to all the silent witnesses in the world, the toys, the pets, the imaginary friends who hold children's secrets until they find the courage to speak. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium, and I felt a pride so deep it seemed to fill every fiber of my being. College brought new independence and new challenges. Sophie chose to study psychology, driven by her desire to help other children like herself. She excelled in her studies, but the coursework on childhood development and trauma sometimes triggered flashbacks that sent her spiraling back into those dark memories. During one particularly difficult semester, when she was studying the long-term effects of childhood sexual abuse, Sophie had a breakdown that lasted several days. She locked herself in her dorm room with me, refusing to eat, refusing to attend classes, just holding me and crying as if she were that 8-year-old girl again. "I thought I was over this, Lila," she sobbed. "I thought I had healed, but learning about all the ways trauma damages the brain, reading about all the other children who went through what I went through, it feels like it's happening all over again." It was during this crisis that Sophie made a crucial decision. Instead of dropping out or changing majors, she used her breakdown as fuel for her passion. She started volunteering at local crisis centers, began speaking at conferences about childhood trauma, and threw herself into research on innovative therapy techniques for young survivors. "If I'm going to carry these scars forever," she told me one night, "then I'm going to make sure they serve a purpose. Every child I help will be proof that what happened to me wasn't in vain." Graduate school was where Sophie truly found her calling. Her thesis on the role of transitional objects in trauma recovery, inspired by our relationship, became groundbreaking research in the field. She presented her findings at national conferences, always keeping a small version of me on the podium as she spoke. The day Sophie received her doctorate, she held me during the entire ceremony. When they called her name, Dr. Sophie Martinez Thompson, she whispered in my ear, "We did it, Lila, we really did it." But the real test came when Sophie started her private practice. Her first patient was a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who had been through similar trauma and hadn't spoken a word since her rescue. Emma's caseworker brought her to Sophie's office, and the little girl immediately spotted me sitting on a shelf among other toys. "That one," Emma whispered, the first word she had spoken in months. "I want that one." Sophie gently lifted me down and placed me in Emma's arms. "This is Lila," she said softly. "She's very special. She knows how to keep secrets safe until you're ready to share them with people who can help." Over the following months, I became Emma's bridge to healing, just as I had been for Sophie decades earlier. Emma would whisper to me during sessions, telling me things she couldn't yet say out loud to Sophie. Gradually, through play therapy and with me as her confidant, Emma began to heal. Watching Sophie work with Emma and dozens of other children over the years, I realized that my purpose had evolved. I was no longer just one child's salvation. I had become part of a legacy of healing that would touch countless lives. Sophie's methods became renowned in the field. She developed protocols for using transitional objects in therapy, wrote books about childhood resilience, and established a foundation that provided comfort objects to children in crisis. Every child who walked into her office received their own special companion, a teddy bear, a doll, a stuffed animal, something that would love them unconditionally as they began their journey toward healing. When Sophie met David, the man who would become her husband, she was 32 years old and had been helping trauma survivors for nearly a decade. David was a pediatric nurse who understood the weight of childhood trauma and admired Sophie's work. Their love story was beautiful in its gentleness, built on respect, understanding, and shared purpose. The night before their wedding, Sophie sat with me in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house. "Lila," she said, "tomorrow I start a new chapter, but I want you to know that none of this would have been possible without you. You taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that someone can care about you without wanting anything in return, that I was worthy of protection and affection." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude rather than pain. "You were my first therapist, my first real friend, my proof that goodness exists in the world. How do I thank someone, something that saved my life?" 2 years later, when Sophie held her newborn daughter for the first time, she brought the baby to meet me. "This is your Aunt Lila, sweetheart," she whispered to little Maria. "She's going to watch over you just like she watched over Mommy." As Maria grew, she often played with me, but it was different this time. This child knew only love, safety, and protection. When Maria held me, it wasn't with the desperate grip of a traumatized child seeking comfort. It was with the carefree joy of a little girl playing with her favorite toy. Sophie became pregnant again when Maria was 4, and this time she had a son they named Gabriel. Watching Sophie with her children was like witnessing a miracle. Despite everything she had been through, she was an extraordinary mother, patient, nurturing, protective without being overprotective, teaching her children about boundaries and body safety in age-appropriate ways. One day, when Maria was about 5 years old, she asked Sophie why Mommy always kept me nearby during important moments. Sophie sat down with her daughter and, in simple terms appropriate for a child, explained that sometimes children go through scary things, and special toys like me help them feel safe until grown-ups can help them. "Will Gabriel and I ever need a special toy like Lila?" Maria asked with the innocent concern only a child can possess. "I hope not, baby," Sophie replied, pulling both children close. "Mommy and Daddy are going to make sure you always feel safe and loved. But if you ever feel scared or someone makes you feel uncomfortable, you can always tell us, okay?" It was in moments like these that I understood the true impact of Sophie's healing. The cycle of trauma that could have continued for generations had been broken. Her children would grow up knowing their worth, understanding their boundaries, confident in their parents' love and protection. Sophie's work expanded beyond individual therapy. She consulted with law enforcement agencies on how to interview child victims, trained teachers to recognize signs of abuse, and worked with legislators to strengthen child protection laws. Her book, The Silent Witnesses: How Transitional Objects Help Children Heal from Trauma, became required reading in psychology programs across the country. At conferences and workshops, Sophie would often end her presentations with a slide showing a photo of me. "This is Lila, she would tell her audiences. She's a simple rag doll, but she represents something profound. The power of unconditional love to sustain a child through unimaginable darkness. Every child deserves their own Lila, someone or something that believes in them when they can't believe in themselves. The foundation Sophie established in honor of our journey together has now provided comfort objects to over 50,000 children in crisis. Each doll, teddy bear, or stuffed animal comes with a card that reads, "This friend is here to love you exactly as you are. They will never leave you, never judge you, and never stop believing that you deserve all the good things life has to offer." Recently, on Sophie's 45th birthday, she received a letter from Emma, the little girl who had been her first patient. Emma was now 22, married, and expecting her first child. She wrote, "Dr. Sophie, I wanted you to know that I still have the doll you gave me during our sessions. She sits on my nightstand now, watching over me as I prepare to become a mother myself. I think about how you saved me, how Lila saved you, and how love can be passed from one generation to the next through the simplest acts of kindness. Today, many years later, I'm still here, no longer as the only source of security for a traumatized child, but as a symbol of resistance, of love, of hope." I sit in Sophie's office, watching her work with the newest generation of survivors, each one teaching her something new about resilience and the power of the human spirit to heal. Sophie became one of the most respected psychologists in the country. She has saved hundreds of children, given voice to thousands of cases, transformed trauma into purpose on a scale that still amazes me. And it all started on a dark night when an 8-year-old girl decided she deserved more than living in silence. The ripple effects of Sophie's healing continue to spread. Her children are growing up to be compassionate, strong individuals who understand the importance of protecting those who are vulnerable. Her patients go on to break cycles of abuse in their own families. The therapists she trains carry her methods to new communities, helping even more children find their voice. But perhaps most importantly, Sophie's story proves that survival is possible. That healing, while never complete or perfect, can transform devastating trauma into purposeful action. That a single act of courage, the decision to speak truth to power, can change not just one life, but hundreds of lives for generations to come. To all of you listening to me, if you know a child who has changed behavior, who has become withdrawn, who seems to carry secrets too heavy for their age, be the voice they haven't found yet. Be their Lila. Sometimes the smallest act of consistent love and presence can be the difference between a child who survives and a child who thrives. And to those who were children like Sophie, you survived for a reason. Your pain has purpose. Your healing can be the lighthouse that guides other people out of darkness. The world needs your strength, your wisdom, your proof that humans can overcome even the most terrible circumstances. For the mothers listening, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Ask questions. Create safe spaces for your children to tell you hard truths. And remember that healing is possible, both for your child and for yourself if you discover you've failed to protect them. Guilt and shame help no one, but action and love can change everything. Because in the end, what saved Sophie wasn't just my silent presence, it was the discovery that she deserved true love. And all of you deserve it too. Every single person listening to this story deserves to be loved, protected, believed, and valued exactly as they are. Trauma stole Sophie's childhood, but it didn't steal her future. It didn't steal her ability to love, to trust again, to transform pain into healing for others. It didn't define her worth or limit her potential. And it doesn't have to define yours either. I'm just a ragdoll, but I had the privilege of witnessing the greatest lesson there is, The resilience of the human spirit is stronger than any darkness. Love, real, unconditional, patient love, can overcome even the most devastating betrayal. And sometimes that love comes in the most unexpected packages. Sophie is no longer a victim. She never really was, even in her darkest moments. She was always a survivor, a fighter, a beacon of light waiting to shine. She just needed someone to believe in her long, enough for her to learn to believe in herself, and I continue being her Lila. No longer her salvation, but the eternal symbol that she was always, always worthy of love, protection, and all the beautiful things life has to offer. Because sometimes, being unconditionally loved by a rag doll is enough to remind a child that she deserves true love in all its forms. And sometimes, that reminder can change the entire world. Powerful call to action. If this story has touched your heart, if Sophie's courage has inspired you, if Lila's unwavering love has reminded you of the power of believing in someone, don't let this moment pass without action. Right now, there's a child somewhere who needs their own Lila. A child who's carrying secrets too heavy for small shoulders. A child who's forgotten what unconditional love feels like. A child who desperately needs someone to believe in them. Share this story. Share it with parents, teachers, counselors, anyone who works with children. Because awareness is the first step toward prevention, and prevention saves lives. If you're a survivor yourself, know this. Your story matters. Your healing matters. Your voice has the power to save another child from the darkness you've overcome. If you're a parent, hold your children a little tighter tonight. Tell them they can always come to you with anything, no matter how scary or difficult. Create the safe space that every child deserves. And if you know a child who seems withdrawn, afraid, or carrying burdens too heavy for their age, be their Lila. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to give up, one person who loves without conditions, one person who believes in them when they can't believe in themselves. Because love saved Sophie. Love can save others. And love, your love, might just be the miracle someone is praying for right now. Don't scroll past this moment. Don't forget this story. Let it change you, move you, inspire you to be part of the solution. Because every child deserves their own Lila. And you might just be that Lila for someone who needs you most.